right, well, let's try this again.
Apologies,
Good,
everyone.
good afternoon once again, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. My name is Bill Fitzpatrick. I am the chairman and CEO for Loop One, and thank you for joining us today. With me is Mícheál from SolarWinds, and this is our, I think, second or third time presenting together. So welcome, Mícheál. And you're muted now. There
I
you
was
are.
unmuted one button, back to the other. So thanks for having me, Bill.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. So let's do a quick intro for those of you that haven't worked with Loop One before. We are one of the largest, if not the largest, SolarWinds partner around the world. There's more than 120 Loopsters based in 7 different countries and serving more than 70 countries. We have more than 50 SolarWinds and Cisco certified engineers, and across those engineers, there's more than 130 SolarWinds certifications. Last year, we completed over 360 projects in our professional services organization, but we also provide a managed services offering that we call Lime Services. And through that offering, we have more than 100 clients that we work with on an annual basis, and it's a number that's growing every quarter, and we're excited for that growth. And of course, we are also the largest provider of instructor-led hands-on courses for SolarWinds and the Orion platform in particular. We can help you get your SolarWinds certified professional designation through our SCP prep courses. And of course, if you are a managed services client of Loop One, these courses are generally available to you at no extra cost. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to give you more information. Today's webinar is on that topic of really taking advantage of the latest features in your Orion platform, and in particular in light of the fact that many of us have recently upgraded as a result of the breach. So we're also going to talk briefly today about the Orion Assistance Program. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Mícheál, and we'll jump in.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. Helen, if you could just give me presenter rights, and I'll just share up my screen. There we go. So, okay, perfect. So the first thing I just want to touch on is, well, why do customers come to SolarWinds? As I'm sure pretty much everybody on the call is aware of who SolarWinds are and what we do. But just to take it back to basics, why do customers turn to SolarWinds? And there's a few reasons. And these are all reasons that over the years, when I was a customer prior to joining SolarWinds, I actually had a lot of these use cases myself. So the most common one is we need a solution now. We have an immediate problem, we need to fix it. So in my case, I worked in various manufacturing industries, be they automotive electronics. I worked in medical industries, medical device industries, and we often had issues that occurred where something that, when we did the root cause analysis, was very basic, but trying to get there without having the right tools was quite hard. So in several cases, we turned to SolarWinds because they were the best of breed for that situation. We also ran into situations where the actual IT environment has changed. So that was where we made acquisitions in particular. In some cases, we rolled out new manufacturing processes where we had monitoring requirements around those as well. And another common reason that personally I always use SolarWinds was to reduce the amount of providers I had for monitoring. So in looking at my last job, we had VMware, we were heavily Microsoft focused, but I also had requirements where I needed to monitor printers. So again, medical device manufacturing, printers were a big thing. So to be able to take information from my Cisco kit, my VMware, my Microsoft servers, even my printers, and have them all in one dashboard, that was a big driver for us moving to SolarWinds. And we now see the same with a lot of customers, not just whether it's on-prem, but also whether it's in the cloud. Now, looking at the portfolio, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these slides. I'm really going to focus more on real-world use cases. So we're going to look at a couple of examples here to tie these together. But going back 8 or 9 years, when people heard SolarWinds, most commonly they thought, hey, SolarWinds is network monitoring, it's network management. But we've grown beyond that. So now when we look at SolarWinds, SolarWinds is an IT monitoring company. It's an IT management company. It's not just for networks, it's not just for systems. So if we look at what we monitor from a SolarWinds perspective, really we want to monitor all things that are IT. So whether it's the network, whether it's your infrastructure, be it storage, virtualization, the servers themselves. And then moving up the chain, are we looking at databases on the back end? Are we looking at front-end applications? So these are all things that from a core functionality perspective, SolarWinds is very strong in. But then across these, we also see we have requirements for security. So again, whether we're looking at, hey, have configs changed on our network devices? Are we tracking logins on our servers? Are we tracking changes to our databases? So across all these pillars, security is quite important. And then for everything involving IT, there's that service management level that has to be taken account of as well. Whether it's proactive tickets, proactive change management, reactive tickets, we're now looking to have SolarWinds act as the default vendor for your IT operations. And we're looking at this not just from an on-prem perspective, again, going back to when a lot of us started in IT, the first time I ever built an Exchange server, start to finish, probably took me about 2 months because I had to go off, I had to spec a server, wait for it to be delivered. I spent 2 days with a CD trying to install Windows 2003 on it, and then another week trying to configure Exchange. Nowadays, it's a lot simpler. If we're spinning up an AMI in Azure or in AWS, if we're moving to a full SaaS application for some of these services, it's a lot faster to do it. But we still have those legacy applications on-prem. And for a multitude of reasons. We also have hybrid type deployments as well. So a lot of functionality might be on-prem, and then we're moving more and more stuff again into the cloud. If we're looking at Office 365, for example, or in the cloud, and then maybe on-prem, we're still hosting some SharePoint. So from a SolarWinds perspective, regardless of what you need to monitor, regardless of where you need to monitor it, we want to become the main vendor for that. Now, today, what we're going to focus in on is, again, traditionally what people think about when they think about SolarWinds. We're going to talk about the SolarWinds Orion Platform. And again, when I go to trade shows, or back when I used to go to trade shows, seems like years ago now, be it Tech Ed or be it Cisco Live and so on, we still had people that think, hey, you know what? We have SolarWinds, we have NPM, or we have Orion, without understanding that the NPM is a module, or the Server and Application Monitor is a module, but these all exist on this Orion platform. And for me, it's one of our biggest strengths. By taking this platform approach, it means that once you get up to speed with one product, you're not reinventing the wheel as you expand out your functionality. So if you learn how to create alerts with NPM, if you learn how to create a report in SAM, if you're doing role-based access control for the IP address manager, you can take those fundamentals from one module, and then as you add in other modules to your system, those skills expand across.
That's a really great point. If I could add a note there, Mícheál.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
For those that are familiar with all of the various modules that Mícheál is referring to, what we're also seeing is a strategic relationship developing between SolarWinds and their customers today. In years past, where SolarWinds was really emphasizing the relationship with the administrators and practitioners of the tool, we're seeing greater commitment from SolarWinds at an executive level and from a product team perspective to connect with end users strategically and help be that single vendor and that single platform, bringing solutions across every team in your organization and correlating that data. It's been really great to watch that evolution.
Yeah, it's one of the things, I suppose, internally, we often have these discussions, within the product teams, we don't want to just focus on individual features now. It's more about the big picture for our customers. You know, it's not that, hey, this release has X number of features. It's how do we make your job day to day easier? That's the really big thing we're looking at within SolarWinds. A lot of what we're trying to do, it's not rocket science. It's just, hey, you know, I have to do this one task 50 times a week. How do I take it from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes? And from a customer perspective, from their organization's perspective, how do we make everything smoother? How do we make it much more automatic from a monitoring perspective? The Orion platform really helps us drive those gains. And again, in the past couple of years, we've done so much work under the covers, not just from an ease of deployment perspective, but then from an ease of upgrade perspective, from a performance improvements. Within SolarWinds, each individual product has its own team working behind it. But we also have a team specifically for the Orion platform. So that gives us this multiplier effect. Instead of each team having to spend half their time figuring out, hey, how do we increase the speed of the web page? How do we, you know, create alerts for these? We have a team dedicated to those functions. So each product team can just drive features specific to their functions. And the Orion platform for us is central to everything. Obviously, over the years, we've made a number of acquisitions, be it Service Desk, be it from Confio on the database performance analyzer, more recently SentryOne. On the security side, products like the security event manager. Orion is still core to all of these, and each module can, or each product can operate independently. But when it comes to tying things together, we're looking at Orion as being the core of that. So we're looking at having one vendor, one platform, and in particular, a single pane of glass into the environment. So what I'm going to do now is very briefly just talk about some of the integrations, just for a minute, and then I'm really going to show this real time. You know, what do we mean when we talk about these different cross-pillar use cases? So on the top left, we can see things like Orion maps. We can see things like IP conflicts. Again, from an Orion platform perspective, going back a few years, we had one approach to showing network information. So we used the Atlas maps for that. Then later on, when we were trying to visualize how does our server infrastructure look, we took an approach called AppStack, where we linked information from specific modules together. We then looked at things like IP address conflict information. So how can we integrate the IP address manager, the user device tracker together? All of these integrations we've built out over the years are based on the fact that we store information in a single database, or a single, maybe even set of databases with a common service, information service connecting those. What that means is it makes it very easy for us to share information from the systems team, with the database team, with the Netman team. Because we have common points within the database, within a relational database, we can easily piece these things together. Over the past couple of years, our Orion product team in particular has been looking at the big picture. Again, we have all this information. How do we make it easy to consume? If we look at functionality like what I consider to be one of the big game changers for us in the last number of years, the NetPath functionality, the ability to dynamically build out a network topology from one starting point to another, but not just showing information from one product, like the Network Performance Monitor, but if you have the NetFlow Traffic Analyzer deployed, let's see some flow information alongside your interface information. If we're seeing performance changes over time, and if those are correlating with config changes over the same time period, let's highlight that as well over those topologies. Another big thing for us quite recently was the per stack functionality. We're going to see this in real time, what this looks like. But again, if we're monitoring various aspects of our network, you know, storage, virtualization, applications, the network itself, can we have very quickly a view that's going to allow us to take all these pieces and view them in one dashboard, instead of having 4 or 5 different screens open. And even, again, from a SolarWinds perspective, when I started, 9 years ago now, if I wanted to look at storage and virtualization and applications, we had 3 different products, 3 different databases, 3 different dashboards open. We just correlate all that together now in one view, make it very, very automatic.
It's really terrific progress that we've seen in the integration of the modules across the different, through the Orion Core Platform. And so one of the things that we really help clients with from a Loop One perspective is just staying on top of all of this, right? There's so many new features. Each module has so many capabilities, and the way that you can bring those together through custom dashboards and additional integrations that are sometimes most easily done using things like the Orion SDK, that's where it pays to partner with a group like Loop One, because we have that development experience, we have that product knowledge and experience, and we can really help you as an end user get the most out of the tool, despite the vast amount of features and capabilities that SolarWinds has added to the project. We can help it stay easy to use.
Exactly. Like out of the box with SolarWinds, we try and make it as simple as possible to get up and running and to give most people most of what they want without much hassle. But we also then want to provide that ability to, hey, we have these custom use cases. We want to create these custom views. We need some help with this, or we want to automate part of our network. So we want to be, for most people, just have it as simple as possible, but then give you the power to automate, to customize as needed. And we're going to see just some of these out of the box integrations, but then also some of the other things that are possible as well. Now, again, I'm going to switch over now to the demo. I really want to focus more on the demo, but we'll come back to a few slides later on. So final thing actually, just before I touch on the demo. Again, from a platform perspective, and this is something not just from a SolarWinds perspective, but also from a Loop One perspective, there are a lot of discussions about with customers. We understand that we can monitor all these various aspects, but we have various objects in different locations. What's the best architecture for my SolarWinds deployment? And there's a number of different options around this. The most common one we will see is something called a centralized deployment with additional polling engines, or APEs for short. And that's basically, we have one main server, one set of databases, and then a number of essentially headless servers that can scale out the polling. So it allows us to scale out horizontally, gives us one central point to manage. Now, in some scenarios, and especially across different geographical regions, but also for other situations such as acquisitions and mergers, customers may have a requirement for different separate standalone SolarWinds deployments. So they might have a different set of modules in the UK office versus what they have in France versus maybe a different deployment in South Africa. And because of business reasons, because of even just network latency issues, they might have a 1 second latency out to South Africa, where everything within region might be 10 or 20 milliseconds. There is an option to have a distributed deployment where all the different servers are standalone, they're operated separately, they have different databases, but to have a global NOC called an Enterprise Operations Console, or EOC. Another option we have, and this is something very new, this is something that came out in version 2020.2.1, which is roughly the June release last year, is something called an Orion Remote Collector, or ORC for short. And essentially what an ORC is, it's like a light polling engine. It's basically taking one of our agents, and these could be the same agent you have for NPM, if you're using the NetPath functionality we mentioned earlier, or if you're using agents for monitoring servers with SAM, or checking configurations with the server configuration monitor. Essentially, taking a standard agent that we're using to monitor a server, we can now deploy a subset of additional polling engine functionality on that. So a very good use case here is, you know what, I have a small remote office with maybe 20 machines. An additional polling engine would be overkill. I might not even have a Windows server there. Maybe I only have a workstation. So let's push out a remote collector to one of these just to handle polling for, you know, my switch, my access point, a couple of servers in that location. So that's something new as part of NAM, as part of SAM. Final couple of things as well that come up quite a bit. HA. You might have a very mature SolarWinds deployment, maybe with a main server, a couple of polling engines, but some customers don't have HA for those. Whether you deploy it locally, so just one server fails, I just want it to come up on the server in the same rack, or maybe you want to fail over to a different site. So whether it's failing over from on-prem to a remote data center, or even failing over into the cloud, or vice versa. So the HA option will work with, again, main servers. It'll work with additional polling engines. And the final point here is we see for our customers, especially with larger deployments, just purely from a performance perspective, they may want to deploy additional web servers. Or even from a security perspective, they want to deploy a web server in a DMZ for access for remote technicians. Different use cases to deploy HA, additional polling engines, additional web servers. I'm not really going to dive into these on the demo side. I'm just going to touch on a couple of use cases. But what we're really going to see here, hopefully I'll get the point across anyway, is the power from having a single platform to view information across your infrastructure. Now, all I'm going to use today is our standard online demo server. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is across the top, we have my dashboards, alerts and activity, report settings. So if I start off with a server with one product, like our network performance monitor or the server and application monitor, I'll have the same rough view. The more modules you add in, the more entities you're going to see on the dashboard, more entities we're going to have in the database, but it's going to be the same flow through everything. Just to spend like 10 seconds on what we're actually seeing here. Under the My Dashboards view, each of these tabs represents a different product. So the more modules you have, the more you're going to see here. And of course, you can have various RBAC for this. So you can have role-based access control to say, hey, you know, perhaps Bill is a new intern and we just want to give him access to the network tab. Or maybe Helen is a senior engineer and she just wants to have access to the network views, but also have a custom view showing some other information specific to one data center. So you can actually build out different views and assign them to different menus. Just out of the box, going through what each of these products are, very briefly. The network tab refers to the network performance monitor. So that's the granddaddy of them all, I suppose. That's really what people have, you know, first in mind when they think about SolarWinds. If a device has SNMP, we can monitor it. So again, back to when I was a customer, I used this for my firewalls, for my wireless access points, switches, routers. I also used it for my UPSs and for my printers. I created custom monitors so I could track printer health information, critical for what we were doing in our company. A plugin module for that is an NetFlow traffic analyzer. NPM can tell us how much bandwidth is being used, but the NetFlow traffic analyzer will tell us what type of traffic it is. What are the sources? What are the destinations? The Network Configuration Manager allows us to manage our network devices. We can automate backups. We can track changes over time on our devices. Again, we have an approval process in place. So you can submit changes here to your devices, and then senior engineers can approve them, can decline them. You can also use this to deploy compliance reports across your environment, just to see, hey, I have 100 Cisco, 2960s. Do we have the same SNMP strings in all of those? Do we have the same banners of the day, the same timeouts and everything. The Logs tab refers to our Log Analyzer product. And this is a product, again, that helps us tie together information from the network side and information from the system side. So we can view syslogs, we can view traps, but we can also pick up information from Windows text files. We can see information from your VMware logs, all in a consistent manner. Moving over to the system side, the equivalent to NPM for servers is a product called a Server and Application Monitor. And you'll probably get this with SolarWinds. We try and make the names as intuitive as possible. So the Server and Application Monitor, you can use it to monitor servers. And then on top of the server, you can monitor applications. So whether it's physical boxes, VMs, even if you're just hitting an API endpoint, SAM is a product that's going to allow us to monitor those. Again, another relatively new product, the Server Configuration Monitor, allowing us to track changes to your servers over time. With all of these products as well with SolarWinds, we try and give you default functionality out of the box. So again, what the most people want. We'll give you the flexibility, hey, I want to create my own monitors for SAM. I want to create my own script monitors for SCM. So you have that ability to customize those. The Databases tab is a good example of, let's take information from outside the Orion platform and bring it in. So in this case, we're going to see information, again, from SAM, if you have it deployed. So looking at how are our SQL instances performing, how are our Oracle instances performing. But let's also take tuning information from the Database Performance Analyzer. So a different product, different database, we'll make an API calls, let's synchronize that in. Virtualization Manager, Storage Resource Monitor, again, without going into detail, those are going to give you your infrastructure monitoring. Going back maybe 5 years, these were standalone products with different databases. We actually rewrote these from scratch to move them into the Orion console, again, to give you that single pane of glass and to make some of our integrations just easy. The Web Performance Monitor allows us to track web page load times. So looking at things from an end user perspective, as opposed to, what's going on under the hood on my Apache web server or my IIS box. How does this web page actually look to end users trying to do a search on SharePoint? I'm not going to dive too much into VNQM. Essentially, you can use this to monitor VoIP infrastructure like Cisco and Avaya call managers. You can also use it to monitor and to manage Cisco IPSLA operations. So across your WAN, you can use VNQM to simulate transactions across various sites. Another integration from a non-Orion product is Patch Manager. So that's a product that you can use to manage your WSUS, your configuration manager environments. But let's give you patching information from there, again in the same dashboard with your SAM information, with your SCM information. And two products aimed more at end user devices. The IP Address Manager can scan the network to tell you what IP addresses are in use, but it can also interact and manage DNS and DHCP servers. So again, whether you have Cisco or Bind or Microsoft deployed, give you one dashboard to view all your IP spaces. And that can also tie in with the User Device Tracker. So that's a product that's designed to not look at performance across the network, but to see which devices are plugged into what ports, but also what end users are connected. So again, in 2021, we're probably interested in who's logged in. We can see from an IP address or from a log, there's some activity from this IP address. Where is that IP address in the network? Which user is logged onto that workstation at this moment in time? So let's look at that history. Now, that's a very quick run through as to all these products, but how do they work together? So I'm going to show two quick examples. The first one is just going to be a standard Cisco device. So all I've done here is I've just done a quick free text search for any devices containing core. And in this case, I'm going to look at a Cisco 3500. So in this case, This is going to be a standard 3500 that we're monitoring by default with NPM. So what I'm going to run through is, what do we get out of the box if we just have the network performance monitor? And where are these integrations that I keep talking about? So the first thing to note is, when we click on a device, it's going to bring us into a view called the Node Details view. And on the top left, we can see some management functionality. So the very first thing, and I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes, I'm not going to click into it now, but we have something called the Performance Analyzer, or perf stack. So it's basically a way to give us time series data across the objects we're monitoring. So if I click into this now, it's going to show me a bunch of key metrics for this device. But as you navigate through the system, you'll see there's an open and perf stack button for things like interfaces, for volumes, for applications. The idea is, let's look at the key metrics for this object, just view historical information for that. But I'm going to come back to that because, again, a good way to tie things together. The Analyze Logs button. Okay, so we're not always going to see that, but in this case, we're monitoring this device with SNMP and NPM, but we're also sending syslogs or traps. So we're saying, hey, we have log data. You may want to look at the logs alongside your standard synchronous polled information. So the more integrations you have, the more we're going to automatically tie those together. We're going to call them out. If you don't have this integration turned on, we're just going to hide those buttons. We're going to hide those widgets. So just focus on the left side of the screen for a minute, the left column. We can see things like basic SNMP information. What's the device type? Where's its location? What's its hardware information? So this is all information coming from NPM. Now, another example of integration is at the very bottom. In this case, this device is an endpoint in a NetFlow that we're capturing with the NetFlow Traffic Analyzer. So this could be a workstation. This could be a server that I'm looking at. We now see information from a network perspective on that view. So now we've seen one view, we have information from NPM, Log Analyzer, and TA. The center columns here are actually showing information from the user device tracker. So like I touched on before, that's not really focused on performance information. That's more focused on connectivity information. So what are the devices that are connected in? What are the MAC addresses? What are the vendors? And in this case, if I look at one of these devices, I can see, hey, there's actually a user logged onto this machine in Active Directory. If I need to, I could select this port and I can now shut it down from the web console. So again, if we're monitoring one object from multiple products, we'll tie those together. If we expand out the subviews, another easy way for us to integrate things together, and again, we'll do this automatically. We'll figure out what those links are. We'll show you this. In this case, this particular device also has information from the VIPA Network Quality Manager. So in this case, we can see IPSLA operations. So these could have been, created manually, a year or two ago. They could have been created from within the NQM itself in the GUI. But we're now taking information from a different module, and again, relating it back to the same object. Looking at the bottom widget here, the Configs tab, we're backing up the device with the Network Configuration Manager. But for this one specific device, let's look at its config history. So let's look at, well, what configs do we have? So in this case, it looks like we have a daily cadence for backups for both the running configs and startup. If I need to, I can click on one of these, I can go in, I can see, what does that text config look like at this moment in time? And I could compare these configurations, how does the running config compare to the startup? So again, from the no details view, I can compare it. Maybe I SSH onto the device web console, and I'm about to make a change, and I think, you know what? Before I do this, let's just download the running config, just in case. Because if something does go wrong, I now have my history of configs, and I can say, let's just take the config that worked yesterday and push it back up to this device. We'll write it back to memory, we'll reboot it. So how do we reduce the downtime, from mistakes made via config changes? Even if we want to just help automate that a small bit, maybe we have a little catalog of scripts that we can run to help automate changes. Now, if I wanted to, make a policy change to ACLs, for example, across 50 devices, instead of having to come in and do them one at a time, I could just come in to the config management view under the NCM home screen and do this against multiple devices. But in this case, I'm just working with one. So again, it can be one-off, it can be multiple, give you both options. Now, going back to one of the slides, I mentioned Orion maps. And I kind of hint that, by having a platform team working on mapping functionality, multiple teams can benefit from this. And the main use case I gave was around networks. So again, in this case, I'm looking at, here's my 4500. I can see in this case, it's connected to 3300 and a 9300. I can see this particular device is connected to these other devices. And if I just click on one, we'll see it's actually telling me, yeah, you know what? As the name hints at, this is a Catalyst 9300. If I select the link, I can now see information here as to what are the interfaces, what are the layer 2 to layer 3 connections between these, and color coded obviously to show how healthy this is. But I can also add in other objects to these maps. And again, a benefit from the platform approach. Now, one of these devices here is actually a server. So I can now see, here's my SQL server. If I just see, well, what can I add? I can actually add in applications that I'm monitoring on that server. I can add in volume information. I can add in this case, LUN information. So maybe I'm interested in, let's look at the volumes that are on the server. Let's just add these to the map and see how healthy they are. So we'll build out these maps automatically, but you can then take these as a starting point, edit them, and put them in different views if you need to. So in this case, I'm now more focused on my SQL server as opposed to my Cisco device. And I'm looking at the volumes. But again, I had mentioned that we can link information from various products together. So now on one view, I have network information, I have volume information, and now I'm starting to see, okay, this SQL server is physical, and some of its drives are actually mapped out in volumes on different storage pools in different storage arrays. And I can just keep adding in different widgets. I can drag and drop different network devices, VMs, and just see what are all these links between these objects. So as I start to go down to the storage array level, I can actually see, just with a few clicks, I can now see, okay, for this particular D drive here and D drive, they're on different LUNs and different storage pools, but both on the same storage array. So it's giving us this big picture view where somebody says, hey, my web application is slow. You may want to create a view showing your load balancers, your SQL servers on the back end, your web servers on the front end. Let's look at the various metrics. Let's have a big picture view of all these objects. Now, I'm only going to spend another 5 minutes here, and then we're going to go back and start to wrap up. But we started off looking at things from a network perspective. But how do we tie things together on the system side? Well, without even opening up different views, I've just clicked on another object. I've now gone from a Cisco 4300 into a physical Windows server. So again, the view I'm seeing here is now showing information primarily from the server and application monitor. So I can see application dependency mapping information. So again, I could actually view this on my map. So with this, the agents can say, server 1 is communicating with server 2 over these ports. So instead of looking at this from a network perspective, it's a server-to-server perspective now. And in this case, I can see this polling engine has a high latency issue, making a connection out to the SQL application running on this SQL server. So at a glance, I can see the various aspects from an application communication perspective. I also have management actions here, like the ability to do things such as, let's look at services that are running on this server. So without even having to RDP or open up an MMC and to view, is bits running? Well, I can stop it from here. I can restart it. I could even, in a production system, I'll have an option to manage these applications, to monitor them going forward. The big thing I want to touch on here, again, from an interrelationship perspective, is the app stack view. There's 5 system products that if you have deployed, we will automatically start to map those together. So on the right-hand side, I can see, here's my server. Now, this is a physical server, so I don't have any virtualization. But if it was a VM, I would see the hypervisors it's sitting on. If it was VMware, I could see the vCenter it's managed, or it's managing it, the data centers, the cluster names as well. So the more objects you have, the more we're going to tie those together. I can see the LUNs that we saw on the map, the storage arrays. But on top, I can also see various applications it's connected to. I can see from a DPA perspective, the database on the back end that we're doing performance tuning on. So the whole point of this is when you have an issue with an application, if it's virtualized, and if you don't have a tool that's looking at all these various aspects, you may spend a couple of hours looking at this and then say, you know what, as an IIS admin, I now have to pass this over to the virtualization team and get them to look at the infrastructure side. And they may think, you know what, this could be a storage issue. I now need to pass this over to the storage team. By having all this information in one view, we can really cut out a lot of those pieces. Now, keeping an eye on time here, I'm going to spend about 3 minutes and just coming back to the per stack view that I mentioned it earlier. And again, I could easily spend 3 hours going through some of the integrations here with just some of the common things. For me, per stack is, again, something we did that seems very simple, but before we had it, it was quite complex to do. I'm trying to troubleshoot an issue. How do I very quickly piece together all the pieces of my puzzle? So we started off here. I selected the option, let's look at the Cisco 4500. Let's see what are we going to get out of the box. We're going to have CPU, memory, response time. If I look at what we call the palette, we can actually see there's other entities here that we know about that I can also add in. So maybe I'm interested in back to syslogs that I talked about earlier. Maybe I want to see, are there any syslogs that tie in with a spike in performance over time? So all I have to do is select the object I'm interested in. So it could be a CPU metric, it could be an interface metric. In this case, I'm interested in syslogs. So just by saying, hey, let's add in some syslogs, I can now see, well, around 4 a.m., we did see a lot of logins actually. What was going on? Is that tying in with a spike in discards? Is that tying in with, a number of dropped packets that we're seeing? But again, I can also start to tie this back with my big picture view. So maybe I want to see metrics from my SQL. I want to see metrics from a LUN. I want to see metrics from an application. So I'm going to say, let's add in my SQL server. And I'm just going to do a quick search. And I'm going to add this into my palette. So it hasn't changed the view, it's still the same. But I can now see, let's also look at the average CPU load for my SQL server. How is that comparing with the average CPU load on my switch it's connected to? Are we seeing a correlation? But back to the big picture, I can now say, find everything else that's related to this. So we'll now see, just by clicking one button, I have a list of all of the LUNs, all of the applications, all of the database instances connected to that one server. So maybe I'm also interested in now, what's the response time for the backup application that's running? Let's look at things from a database perspective. What's the wait time on my databases? Are we seeing blocking? How does that correlate to the syslogs that we saw? So if we see a spike in syslogs and then we see an increase in block statements, is that because we've dropped some network packets? That only took me a couple of minutes to build this out. I can obviously save this to a dashboard. I can reload it later on. I can view this on a home screen view. Really what I'm trying to get to here is the more modules you have, more pieces of the puzzle you're looking at, the easier it is, the faster it is to get to root cause when you're trying to troubleshoot issues. If you're only looking at the network and somebody complains about SharePoint, it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. But if you start looking at, here's my SharePoint server, here's the network around it, or the database on the back end, here are the applications on the front end. If you can take all those pieces, pull them into one dashboard, the troubleshooting time it's going to take you could go from hours or even days, it could be dropping down to minutes. And that's the big thing we're really trying to do in SolarWinds. How do we speed up the amount of time it takes you to troubleshoot issues across your environment day to day? So again, I could spend hours doing this, but I'm conscious of time. Bill, do you want to just jump back over to the slide deck and we can go through the OAP slide? And
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mícheál, for that. It's amazing the amount of functionality that console holds these days. And just thinking back what it looked like over the years, the perf stack in particular is impressive. I love the way they've expanded it since it was first introduced, and that ability to bring things like syslog from a network device and compare that to any other part of your environment that could be having a correlated effect, and drill into that and see those correlated timeframes in such an easy manner. Very powerful stuff. So thanks for that demo.
Doing something simple, it's taken us years to figure it out. Simple isn't easy. That's one of the hard things to do, but
indeed.
Definitely some improvements.
So yeah, we will go ahead and jump back over to the slides here, and we'll move towards our conclusion. So as you saw, Mícheál kind of demonstrating there across all the different modules and the capabilities and that one platform, single pane of glass sort of perspective. A lot of what we're able to partner with clients to do today is reduce the number of tools that they run, right? So reducing tool sprawl, creating intelligent dashboards that allow different teams to share information in meaningful ways and speed the time it takes to do root cause analysis. And then, of course, as you saw in the perf stack example, saving those common cases and being able to reuse them easily, right? So where things are connected and we want to see them on a connected basis, it's easy to do, while at the same time being able to leverage the new mapping functionality that Mícheál demonstrated there. If you haven't seen the intelligent maps before, it is one of the most impressive new features in the latest releases. And then, of course, for years, we've known that SolarWinds is our multi-vendor solution that is vendor agnostic, but can monitor pretty much anything that has an IP address in some way, shape, or form. So as you might imagine, right, those functionalities are giving us that ability to manage costs and in many cases reduce costs. Obviously, risk is something that we're always trying to manage, and certainly, the SolarWinds breach was a big topic around risk recently. But I think you can see that SolarWinds has made a commitment to being secure by design and addressing the breach, and now we're watching the rest of the world kind of fall prey to it, whether it's Microsoft or any of these other vendors that are now being reported as having had also some very substantial breaches recently. And then finally, just that idea of enhanced agility, which goes back again to this concept of sharing information across teams and really being able to reach conclusions more quickly, more easily. So one of the other things we want to talk about briefly here before we wrap up is something that you may have heard of. We had a webcast last week on this topic for a couple of different regions with Sudhakar himself, as well as other partners. And that is something they call the Orion Assistance Program. So the Orion Assistance Program was created specifically because of the Sunburst breach, and it was designed to give clients an opportunity to get assistance with their upgrade and remediation from SolarWinds at no cost. And so the way that you can access this program is to contact pretty much anybody at SolarWinds, whether it's support or whether it's your sales organization, and let them know that you're interested in the OAP program. And then they will take you through a qualification process and work to see what they can do for you to bring you into the program. And so what they're doing then is they're partnering with groups like Loop One and a handful of others around the world to then make sure they have the capacity to help clients through that breach. And so in some cases, depending on the complexity of your environment, it might be a few hours of consulting time to help you do an upgrade, or it could be up to 24 hours of time to help you do a fresh install. So again, this is something that SolarWinds is making available as an effort to help ensure that clients are able to get through the breach and get into a healthy state with the assistance of partners like Loop One. So if you're interested in that program, there's more information at the link there under the Secure by Design Resource Center. Mícheál, anything you want to add there on those topics?
Yeah, no, Bill, I think you've covered it off quite well. As you mentioned, feel free to contact either support or your internal SolarWinds account manager. And if you have any questions on this, you can certainly, they're more than happy to work through. In some cases, it may just be somebody internal within SolarWinds may be able to assist, but Loop One certainly have been a premier partner helping us for those more complex, larger scale deployments. So,
yep, thank you. So let's go ahead and open it up very briefly here to questions, and then we're going to wrap up with a couple notes on our Lime services. So let me take a look at our Q&A here.
We did have a couple of questions that came in, Bill. So one was actually sort of, I guess, along the lines of the OAP program. What will happen if I haven't upgraded to the 2020.2.4 build?
It's a very good question. The certs were revoked on Monday, and that was just us trying to be proactive. We don't believe that there was any issues regarding the existing certs, but just to be proactive and do everything we could to revoke those. If you haven't seen an issue already, you're unlikely to see an issue unless you're still running an affected build, and later on you go to run a repair or you go to add in new functionality with the same installers. So after this stage, the only options would be to run the latest 2020.2.4 or 2019.4 builds to use the latest installers that are signed. So those are the most likely things you would see, just trying to repair an out-of-date version.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Why don't we go ahead and move towards conclusion here? So I just quickly want to share with everybody something that you may have heard a little bit about, but it's something we're really proud of here at Loop One that we've really focused on launching here through the beginning of the year, and it's what we call our Lime services. This is based around something that we call the Loop One monitoring maturity model. And it's really something we've created over the decade plus of experience that we have inside our organization, based on the experiences that we've seen clients go through in their efforts to deploy tools well, to get the value out of tools, and to really drive business outcomes and business insights using IT tools data. So the model consists of 5 phases of maturity. It consists of 6 assessment areas, and then there is a deep run book and scorecard that we work with you as an end user to implement across the organization with something we call a Lime roadmap, so that we're really making sure that you're getting the absolute most value out of your tools on a feature by feature and product by product basis, but with that end-to-end observability and business outcomes in mind. So if you're interested in hearing more about Lime, feel free to reach out to us here at Loop One, and we will be happy to share more with you. All right, with that, we are here at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and conclude here. I want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you, Helen, for hosting. And of course, most of all, thank you, Mícheál, for your time and expertise. It's been great.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.